Last week, we started looking at positioning ourselves for the presence of God. You know, there's something about the presence of God that is assured to you and I. But at times, I believe that we miss his presence, that we don't experience the presence that God intends. And my heart as a pastor over the next couple weeks is just talking about this reality of how do I put myself in a position to experience the presence of God? We used Zacchaeus as the example last week where he climbed the tree so he could see above the crowd. You know, there's something in us that I believe God desires for us to position ourselves to experience his presence. And this week I was looking in the Old Testament and even back at our story of Zacchaeus at some examples of the presence of God, because I felt like if I could see some examples of his presence and look at maybe some things that preceded the presence, it might help me come up with some ideas on how to position myself. So I looked at some stories. One was with Moses as he was preparing the tabernacle for the presence of God. And what happened was he built the tent according to the design that God gave him. And he walked in, and it said that he could hear God speaking to him from the cherubim. He talked to God face to face. You know, David rebuilt this temple, or he built the temple for the first time, off the model of the tabernacle that Moses had in the wilderness. And we read when Solomon built this, it was an extravagant building. Just for an example, he used the cedar of Lebanon and gold. All the rooms were lined with gold. It's anywhere from 600 talents to 100,000 talents of gold on the low end. That's $1 billion worth of gold on the high end. Who knows how much gold was used for this temple? But it says when they built the temple, this is going to be in 2 Chronicles chapter 5, the trumpeters, the musicians joined in unison to give praise and thanks to the Lord. Accompanied by trumpets and cymbals and other instruments, the singers raised their voices and praised the Lord and sang, "He is good, his love endures forever." Then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. Talk about the presence of God. So powerful that the priests couldn't perform their duty. Another example of the presence of God is Elijah on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, where they're going to have this kind of face-to-face confrontation and see which God is the true God. They're going to sacrifice and call out to their God to bring fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice. And Elijah, in his pride, arrogance, or just confidence, whatever way you want to look at it, has water dumped on the sacrifice, and he cries out to God. It says, the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil. It also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Talk about the presence of God. It was so real that everyone saw the presence of God. Zacchaeus, when Jesus came to him, Jesus said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Zacchaeus experienced the presence of God, but there's something powerful in the presence. There's a common theme in these stories that accompanies the presence of God. Do you know what Moses was doing before they dedicated the tabernacle, before he went in and he heard God speak? They were offering animals of sacrifice. The total number of animals for the burnt offering came to 12 young bulls, 12 rams, 12 male lambs. Together with their grain offering, 12 male goats were used for the sin offering. The number of animals for the sacrifice of the fellowship offering came to 24 oxen, 60 rams, 60 male goats, 60 male lambs a year old. These were the offerings for the dedication of the altar after it was anointed. See, there was sacrifice that preceded the presence of God. Solomon in the tabernacle. Listen to what it says his sacrifice looked like. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the Levites took up the ark and brought up the ark and the tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishings in it. The Levitical priests carried them up, and King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel had gathered around him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle they couldn't be recorded and counted. I mean, you talk about sacrifice. Elijah on the Mount Carmel, he sacrificed a bull before the presence of God came down. Even Zacchaeus, before he got to spend the time with Jesus at his house, Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham." Zacchaeus, he sacrificed, and I'm going to give half of what I have, and I will promise you, because he was a tax collector, this comment of I'll give back 4 times the amount of what I've cheated probably says I'm giving everything. I'm giving it all because I want you. You know, sacrifice, it positions us for the presence of God. You know, we don't talk about sacrifice. I can't imagine in Solomon's day what it looked like, what it sounded like, what it smelled like when they were sacrificing more animals than could be counted. And in my brain, in my humanity, it's hard for me to comprehend how sacrifice like that brings about the presence of God. You know, it's not something we often talk about because, you know, sacrifice is hard stuff. Why do we sacrifice? You know, I was thinking, Deuteronomy chapter 6. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you're crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it will go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. You know, last week we looked at Zacchaeus positioning himself for the presence of God by loving him with all his strength. His physical body, he had to reposition. Another translation will say might. You know, we experience the presence of God when he recognizes our love for him. You know, last week we positioned through strength. This week, I believe through sacrifice, we're positioning our soul. We're positioning us, ourself. You know, that's hard to think. You know, when we think of sacrifice, the perspective that we have is that we're getting God's attention by bringing a sacrifice before him. But he's God. He's Emmanuel. He's the God who is always with us. I don't think we have to get his attention. What I believe we're doing by sacrifice is that we're repositioning ourselves. When I sacrifice, I'm changing me and I'm shifting my position so I can experience the presence of God. Romans 12, listen to this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in God's view, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. We today are offering ourselves, that's our soul, that's who we are, as a living sacrifice to God. And when we offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, I'm changing myself so I can see and experience the presence of God. Sacrifice precedes the presence. What I do for me positions me to love the Lord my God with all my soul. Galatians 2, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Listen to Luke chapter 9. He said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet lose or forfeit their very self? I have to position myself. It's sacrifice. It's hard. There's things my flesh wants at times. There's things that I want to do at times. There's ways I want to act at times. But I offer myself as a living sacrifice because I need the presence of God. I long to love him with my whole self. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 5 says that you come to him, the living stone rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him. Your living stones are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We're that expensive temple. We're the priceless temple, the gold that God's using today to build his temple. And it says that in that we offer spiritual sacrifices because God longs for us to experience his presence. Remember the story of the rich young ruler and don't be like him. You can find that story in Luke chapter 18. He came to Jesus and said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells him to keep the law. He says, I've done that. Jesus says, go sell everything and give it to the poor. And he goes away sad. He doesn't experience the presence of God because he's not willing to sacrifice. Sacrifice positions us for the presence of God. If you long to experience his presence, what must you do to change yourself so that you can show him your love? The Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you, may he turn his face towards you, grant you his peace, and may you position yourself through sacrifice for the presence of God. Be blessed.